Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mesa City Council study session for February the 9th. I would like to excuse Councilmember Freeman, who's out of town. The first item on our agenda for today's meeting is to hear a presentation and provide direction on a permanent household hazardous waste facility located at 2412 North Center Street and discuss the benefits of the city's recycling and hazardous waste programs. Mr. Boucher, good to have you with us. We're excited to hear about this.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Council. Is that working? My name is Scott Boucher. I'm the Director of Environmental Management and Sustainability. I am here today to talk to you about two items. Our permanent household hazardous waste facility that we're in the process of designing, and also because there were some questions on Monday night in regards to the benefits of recycling, I have a couple of slides here in the beginning that kind of give a recycling overview. So for fiscal year 15-16, City of Mesa had approximately $660,000 worth of revenue that was generated from our recycling program. So this is what we get paid for the commodities that we're bringing to recycling facilities. In addition to that, you have the avoided landfill costs. So that $800,000 number is if instead of taking those materials to a recycling facility, if we would have landfilled those, the city would have incurred costs of about $800,000 to landfill those materials. So overall, the net benefit to the city is approximately $1.5 million with the recycling program. Now, just a little bit with a recycling overview. Recycling isn't without its challenges. These are national challenges. They're not unique to Mesa. The first two kind of go hand in hand with education and contamination. So we are working hard with our Recycle Right campaign to teach folks what can go into or what cannot go into the Blue Barrel, because contamination is an issue at the recycling centers. When there's materials in there that can't be recycled, they have to process them out of the recycling stream, and then we actually get charged for that contamination based on the contracts that we have. So we are working very hard. If the one thing I could teach folks is plastic bags, so those bags that you get at Bash's or Target, those sorts of things, they can be recycled, but they cannot go into your Blue Barrel. So best thing to do is to take those plastic bags or your bread bags, those sorts of things, the wrappers around plastic bottles for the cases of water, put them into those plastic bags. If you take those to your local retailers, so your Bash's or your Walmarts, they'll have a place when you first walk in the door that you can put those bags, and they can get recycled. But when they go to the recycling facilities, they tend to get caught up into the gears of the machinery in those recycling facilities and can cause a lot of issues where it actually can shut down the facility of a period of time because they have to cut those out of there. So the one thing, if we can keep the plastic bags out of the Blue Barrel, that would be a great thing for the city here. Also the commodity market, so it's worth, we're selling these on the market. Our partners in recycling are selling those, and those commodity markets go up and down over periods of time. It can be a rather volatile market sometimes. So that's a challenge for us also. As those commodity prices drop down, we don't receive as much revenue as what we used to get. Just a little bit of the environmental benefits associated with recycling. So going back, many of you have probably heard reduce, reuse, recycle. There is a reason that it is listed in that order, being that the first one, reduce, is the best thing that you could do, and recycling should be your last option associated with it. So with reduce, it's really buy what you need and use what you buy. It makes sense if you're a homeowner that you don't buy stuff that then you're just going to get rid of because you're spending money on something that you didn't use. So just, buy what you need and use what you buy, and then reusing it. So if there's a purpose to whatever material you have, if you can reuse it again, it's much better than just using it one time and throwing it away. An example with those plastic bags would be your reusable bags. So if you can go to the store and bring those linen bags with you that you reuse over a period of time, as opposed to a bag that you use one time and then get rid of. If you think about it, sometimes those bags are only used for a couple of minutes by the time you get home from the store, and then you get rid of them. So reusing things. And then lastly, recycling. All of these things help us extend the life of our landfills over a period of time, which helps us in regards to what those costs will be for us when we do have to landfill materials. And also just from a social responsibility, it helps reduce the dependence on natural resources. So anytime you use an item one time and then get rid of it, you're really not using that item to its fullest extent. So as much as we can get away from a throwaway type society is better for us in regards to the use of natural resources. And then it does also help create jobs where you've got folks that are working at those facilities, or even It's getting to the point where there's some niche markets. Example would be like pallets. You see a lot of pallet art now that people are making and selling. So, it helps create jobs that are reusing materials as opposed to taking virgin materials and turning them into things. So that's a real quick recycling overview, like I said, because there were some questions on Monday night, but now we'll get into our household hazardous waste events. So currently we have 4 events a year. The purpose of these events is to prevent household hazardous waste from entering our storm sewers, our sanitary sewers, and also our solid waste vehicles. So for the safety of our operators, because these materials, hence from the name, are hazardous in nature, and so if they are thrown away, we've actually seen some of these in the blue barrel before, but when they go into the solid waste vehicle and they get compacted down, they can cause issues. I've seen fires that have started from materials that have gone into the vehicles. Also, where you've had fumes go into the cab of the vehicle and have created an exposure for the operators. So really, it's something that we don't want to go into our solid waste stream. We want it to be dealt with more responsibly where it's brought to us. Also, it provides a way then, having these events, for residents to get rid of this material and make sure it's properly disposed of and or recycled. The events have been very popular. We've been having events for as long as I've been here. So you can see over the last 10 years that it continues to increase in popularity. Over the years, as it's increased in popularity, we've had to make some changes at our events. We've added multiple lines to the events, which requires more folks to be working at the event. When you look at these numbers, you have anywhere, 12 to 1,600 people that are coming through in an event in a 4-hour period, which is 300 to 400 people in an hour, which really gets down to a vehicle every 10 or 12 seconds. And so we're trying to not only efficiently get them through there as quick as possible, but do it as safely as possible too, because of the hazardous natures of the material. Large amounts of HHW that is collected. And due to the schedule of our events, because we only have 4 events a year, our residents are required then to hold on to this material sometimes for long periods of time, waiting for that next event to happen.
Scott, we should mention that with that volume, as it continues to grow, the experience too is that the wait time for the residents, those lines get significantly longer. They get out onto our major roads and they can be in line for more than 30 minutes sometimes, maybe up to 45 minutes.
And I have a slide coming up here that, so these quotes that you see are actually from residents during our surveys. So that we give them a survey when they go through the line, and folks that do respond to the surveys, they love the events and they love the fact that we have them. Their number one thing that they do not like, and this is consistent in regards to feedback that we receive from the surveys, is to wait. Whether it's waiting for 45 minutes to, you can see somebody who put 2 hours to drop off old oil and paint, but also the waiting in between events. So when we have our last event in April of the year, and then the next event isn't until October, a resident can be holding that material. That's about 7 months that they have to hold on to that material. So if you're somebody who's cleaning out the garage and you want to get rid of that stuff, to then have to hold it again for 7 months is, I will say that we receive frustration from some of the residents that they're not able to get rid of that material. So that is the number one complaint. You usually get overwhelming positive response, but that is the number one complaint, is the waits. So to get into the permanent facility, what this will allow us to do is increase hours of operation. So we have 4 events at 4 hours. So it's about 16 hours per year that we provide this service. Now we're going to have a facility that will be open 20 hours a week, every day of the year or every week of the year. So it's going to give us 1,040 hours of service for the residents. Service will still include Saturdays. So they'll be able to bring their materials on Saturdays. We will be open on Saturdays. The facility will have room for the drop-off, and I'll show you some renderings that we have from the architect at the end of this so you can get a better idea of what the facility will look like. But there'll be an area for them to pull up and drop off, similar to what they do now at our events. We'll have an area for sorting and bulking of this material, which will really help us with some efficiencies in regards to having time to be able to bulk these materials and to package them in a more efficient manner, because at the events, everything has to leave at the end of that day, whereas this will provide us more storage time that we can hold on to these materials. And then also the picture you'll see down on the left-hand corner there is a swap shop. So an example would be if you buy some paint at Home Depot, it's custom color. You get home and you put it on the wall, a little bit on the wall, and it's just not the color that you thought it would be once you put it on there. And so now you have this brand new paint that you're not going to use. The store won't take it back because it's a custom color. You can bring it to our facility. We'll put it out into a swap shop area, and somebody else, it might be that color that they're absolutely looking for. So there'll be an ability for folks to then take materials. It's amazing sometimes, we get materials sometimes that are brand new. They've never been used. And so there's still a value to those. And so instead of us having to pay to dispose of it, you give a resident an opportunity to come in and get that material and have it and use it. There'll also be some room for our support services area. Those are the ones who are out in the field and do all of the support work for our field staff, so our barrels and our bins that are out in the field. They're currently in a trailer that's over 30 years old and is needing replacement, so this will give them an ability to have an area for them when they come in the mornings, in a break room and that sort of thing. And then there's also a small area for future expansion that we're actually working, trying to identify a grant that we could turn it into an educational component within the facility for being able to teach youth and others about recycling in ways that they can be more sustainable. So, and then also it's there just in case if this does grow and we need more space to grow into it, this will allow us to do that. At the facility, we will take everything that we currently take at our events. So you can see a list of all the things here. I won't read all of these off. The only thing I will let you know that we won't be taking at the facility that we currently take at the events is prescription medications. And that's because we're required to have a police officer on site when we take those prescription medications. And so to have a police officer 1,040 hours a year becomes cost prohibitive. But the police department does have a program where you can drop those off at substations. So the residents will still have a means to get rid of those prescription medications. It just won't be at our events. So that will be the only thing. Otherwise, everything that you can take to the events, whether it's appliances, tires, electronics, or all of your paints, oils, pesticides, those sorts of things will be accepted at the event or at the facility. Here's what we're looking at as far as the changes in cost. You can see with our contract labor is pretty high for these events because we have so many folks that are there in order to get those folks through in an efficient and safe manner. In addition to that, you can see that the big driver is our disposal cost. Now, we do anticipate that we will receive more waste at this facility. We're anticipating somewhere 30 to 40% more waste will come to the facility because we think it will be used more by the residents because it's more available. But we will have efficiencies associated with it that I described before, whether it's the ability to bulk the materials, the ability for residents to reuse the materials, or just an ability, there's sometimes, we'll have cubic yard boxes that are a quarter or half full at the end of an event. We have to get rid of that at the end of the day because I can't have it sitting at the East Mesa Service Center in the parking lot for months at a time. This will allow us to make sure that anything that leaves the facility is completely full, is packaged efficiently. Many of the materials will be able to be bulked, so you'll take it out of its original container and get it down into another. So all of that void space that's in the container will be eliminated. So we anticipate there'll be a slight rise in the disposal cost, but it will not match how much more material we'll be taking in, if that makes sense. Okay? So here's the construction timeline and the cost of what we're looking at. So we're currently in the design process. We're just over the 30% design. You can see the cost estimate that we've received from the construction manager at risk for the facility. And then that last line lists what's referred to mostly as FF&E, so your furniture, fixtures, and equipment that will be necessary for the facility once it is open. We're looking at finishing the design at the end of this fiscal year and beginning construction in September of this year, with a completion date sometime around August of September of 2018, when we'll be opening up the facility full-time to our residents. So next year, we'll still have our 4 household hazardous waste events. We're going to continue the same schedule with 2 events at the east side, 2 events at the west side. But we'll also, at that time, we're working on kind of an education campaign. So as people are driving through and waiting in line to drop off their materials, that we'll have some signage that will tell them that this facility is coming, anticipated opening date, and so letting them know that this is coming along. Here's some photos. So I've got a couple of renderings you'll see. And this is located, I guess maybe I didn't hit on it in the beginning, this is 2412 North Center, which is center just north of the 202. It's our current Center Street yard. That's where our support services staff is located currently. So this would be off of Lehigh Drive. It's a driveway that will be right off of Lehigh in Center. And so you will pull up, and as you can see, you'll pull up and be able to stop under the overhang, and it will be unloaded. Here's the opposite side view. We'll be able to hold 4 to 6 cars underneath that canopy. The employees will come out, they'll take the materials out of the cars, unload it like they do at the current events, and bring it into the facility. You'll be able to pull out and get back onto Center Street and leave. And here's one last rendering of it. And kind of on the far, kind of the top left here, we'll also have an ability for folks. We'll have bins that will be there so that you can also bring cardboard, you can bring scrap metal, you could bring the things that go into your Blue Barrel, and be able to drop those off there also, so that it would also be a recycling center, so to speak, in addition to the household hazardous waste facility. Because we do, and to be honest, we get a lot of folks at the events that then bring those types of things because they kind of want a one-stop shop. They load it all into their car and they want to get rid of all of that stuff. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Scott. Council, questions for Mr. Boucher? I did have a question, 2 questions. Medications. I've heard it's a bad idea to, if you've got prescription medication, I mean, it's a bad idea to have them lying around the house, but it's
Yes.
also perhaps a bad idea to put them down the toilet or down the water supply.
Yes.
So those are the 2 bad options. So I guess the correct way to dispose of it, you're saying, would be to take it to a police station?
That's, the police department does take what are the controlled substances. So those would be the ones that are your painkillers or muscle relaxers, those type of medications, which are also the ones that are a bad idea just to have laying around the house for obvious reasons. The other non-prescription ones, you can also take them and put them into, we've recommended you can put them like into a coffee can or something like that, mix them in, so take them out of their original packaging, put them into a coffee can, or put them in with some of the garbage that you have, and it can go to the landfill. It's not the ultimate way to dispose of them, but that is a struggle also within, is how to deal with those drugs. The trouble with us being able to take these at these facilities is we don't have an ability to know what is a controlled substance and what is not. That's why the police department is there to help us out with that. So, but yes, your best bet, if you can get, and again, if we get back to the reduced side of it, so only buy what you need. If you don't need the medications, then don't purchase those. But then if you can bring them, you can put them into your Black Barrel, or you can bring them to our police departments. Currently at our events, you can also bring them to our events. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Other question I had, you mentioned appliances is one of the hazardous wastes that you accept. We also have a program, though, for picking up large bulk items.
We do.
If I've got an old refrigerator or something like that that potentially is hazardous waste, but it also is just, maybe I don't have a pickup truck or a trailer and I have difficulty disposing of it myself, can you remind us of the program for just picking up large bulk items?
Yes, we have both a bulk item and an appliance pickup program, and that's a scheduled service. So if you call into our office, we'll be able to schedule that for you. It is a fee service. The fee is about $25, but we will come directly to your house and we will pick up that appliance, or we will pick up bulk items that you may have and take them away for you. It is actually a very popular service that we provide. We're currently running that service twice a week and looking at the possibility of expanding it because we have a demand from the residents that we're having to sometimes push them out for a couple of weeks because we just don't have enough staff to be able to pick them up. So we're looking at even expanding that service going forward.
So the alternative to that, if you happen to be someone with a pickup or a trailer, is you could take it to the landfill yourself, get somebody to help you lift it into the truck and drive to the landfill, and they'll charge you a fee based on the weight of what you're dropping off, right?
Yeah, and depending on what, some of the stuff they won't take also because of the Freon, so like in a refrigerator or that sort of thing, they may turn you away on that. But if you bring it to our facility, once you get it into the truck, then we'll actually take it out of the truck for you even and unload it, and you won't even have to get out of your truck in order to unload it once the facility's open.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Luna.
Scott, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. But I was going to ask you about the plastic bags because I collect them. I have big bags in my garage, and I need to get rid of them. And sometimes I just don't want to go to bashes. Will you have something available there at the recycle center that we can drop off plastic bags, or you still want us to take them to the grocery stores?
We haven't discussed, I'll be honest, we haven't discussed that with the plastic bags. We can take a look at it. I know with the grocery stores that they already have contracts associated with the folks that take those bags. So it's something that, because they get such large volumes in, it's going to, we would have to look at who we could contract with for those. And depending on the volume that we're getting in, how much what we'd be able to do with those. But it's definitely something that we can look into.
The other thing is, I wanted to comment on, I know that you work with Mesa Public Schools and you encourage kids to bring their plastic bags.
Yes.
And they work in conjunction with you. And then you actually have them produce a bench or some kind of, some amenity for the school, so.
Yeah, we have our Bench the Bag program,
Okay.
which we do. It's a competition between the large and the smaller schools. We kind of break it up into two different sections, and the kids will compete over a period of time of who can bring in the most plastic bags. And it's amazing. The last year when we completed Bench the Bag, we actually had a front load truck that was completely full of plastic bags. So if you can imagine, we've got some pretty cool pictures in regards to the amount of bags that we were able to collect from Mesa Public Schools. And it's a great way to, what we have found is if you teach the kids will teach the parents and the grandparents. Because sometimes it's difficult to teach adults, but kids, they have a desire to learn. And when they learn things and they see their parents doing something that they learned that they're not supposed to do, they'll let their parents know. So it's a great campaign. I love the Bench the Bag campaign and the work with Mesa Public Schools. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Whitaker.
Good morning, Scott. One question I have is the anticipated revenue projection. Can you elaborate more on how that $615,000 per year number was created?
So the recycling?
Slide 10, the revenue projection.
Let me go to 10. I apologize. Okay, that is from our household hazardous waste fee. So we have a fee. It actually is called the Clean and Green fee, which is it's either 83 or 80, it's 84 cents. And that fee is charged to all of our residential solid waste customers. 43 cents of that 84 cents goes to our Clean Sweep, Green Sweep program. So that's a program where once a year you can get roll-offs put into your neighborhood, and you can use that for cleaning out whatever it is that you may have in your house, and you'll have roll-offs in your neighborhood. The other 41 cents is dedicated to the household hazardous waste program. And so that $615,000 is the projected revenue for this year from that 41 cents for the household hazardous waste program. And that fee is dedicated to running our events currently and will be used to fund the facility going forward.
Okay. Well, the question I have is on the disposal cost. So on slide 8, we're projecting that currently we spend 16 hours a year on the program, and it's increasing quite drastically to 1,040 hours per year. But the disposal cost on slide 10 doesn't really move that much. So are we're not anticipating that much more items to dispose, or is it?
No, we are anticipating a significant increase in the amount of waste that we will receive, but we also, just from experience of working the events over the years and then seeing other facilities and talking with other cities, so when we hold an event at our East Mesa Service Center, for example, and we're in the parking lot at the service center, at the end of the day, all of that material has to leave the site. So as I said before, there's a cubic yard box, or there'll be a 55-gallon drum that is not completely full. There'll be multiple because everything's packaged separately. So you've got pesticides in one drum, and we're talking about, with pesticides, we'll have 10 to 20 55-gallon drums full of pesticides by the end of the day. So if you have a couple of those that aren't completely full, you're still paying that full amount for those 55-gallon drums. In addition to that, because we have so many cars coming through, and everybody's trying to get them through as quickly as possible to reduce those wait times, we're not able to package them as efficiently as possible. So when you look at a cubic yard box example that we have some paints that are in, a lot of them kind of get tossed in there. And so there's some void space that's within those boxes. Whereas with the event, because we'll be open for 20 hours a week, but then we'll have staff that's there 40 hours a week. Once the facility is closed, then they have an opportunity to make sure it's packaged as efficiently as possible, so everything's lined up, and there's no real void space in those containers. Plus, we'll have an ability to bulk a lot of the materials. Another example would be like with used oil. If used oil has chlorine in it, we have to pay to dispose of it. If it doesn't have chlorine in it, we can actually get paid. Again, it's the commodity market side with recycling that the oil prices have gone down. It used to be very valuable. It's less valuable now, but it's that avoided cost that you can have. We'll be able to take an oil drum that somebody drops off to us, put a strip in there that will tell us whether it has chlorine in it or not, and then be able to pour that in the right oil bulking material so that we make sure that the oil that we do get that does not have contamination in it is going to go off and be recycled. Whereas we just simply don't have the time to be able to do that at these events because there's just too many people coming and we have to leave by the end of the day. And we typically, my staff's not leaving from those events until 5 or 6 p.m. that night. Even though we close at 12, the work is far from done at that point because everything needs to be packaged, manifested, and loaded into the semis. And we're sending anywhere between 3 and 4 semis off at the end of the day when these events leave.
Great, thank you.
So the household hazardous waste fee is paid as part of your utility bill. When someone uses this facility, you're not going to say, thank you very much, here's a bill.
Right.
It's come in, drop it off, leave, and nobody no one takes it, money doesn't change hands, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
You clarified, Scott, that it's for Mesa residents only, right?
Yeah, Mesa residents only.
So those who are paying into the fee.
Right,
effectively.
yes. So it's Mesa residents only, and it's only residential customers who pay the fee. Because if you own a business in the city of Mesa, that waste, so even though it would be the same exact product, it is regulated if you are a business, where it's not regulated if you are a resident. And that just gets down to the EPA and trying to regulate individual households. It's just something that they don't typically do.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
How do you differentiate between residents when they come in? Do you ask for
We ask for a utility bill.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much. We'll look forward to this facility moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda, item 1B, is to hear a presentation and discuss the major expenditure categories, current fiscal trends, and rising costs affecting the city's general fund. Welcome back, Candace.
Good morning.
Hopefully,
Mayor.
do we get some sort of certificate at the end of these
I
presentations?
think we should. A little education certificate, continuing education credits.
Great. Well, I need it.
So
They've been very
before-
good, by the way. I don't mean to, but we're looking forward to this.
So before we start today, I have been very remiss in introducing my partner up here. So I'm going to let him introduce himself so that I don't mess it up again.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Ritchell. I am one of the Deputy Directors in the Office of Management and Budget.
Welcome, Brian.
So now you know why I keep bringing them up every time. And then also, before we get started, I do want to say that I do reuse. So when I'm up here with my disposable, I reuse, and then I
Nice.
recycle at the end of the life of this. So just want to make sure that as I bring my bottle up here, it doesn't look like I do, but I do. So,
Okay.
so we're all in. So I want to make sure we can clear that before we get started. All right. So this morning, we're going to talk about, we're back to the general fund again. So when we start looking at our funds. So we're back to the general fund, and we're going to talk about the expenditure side. So a week ago, we talked about the revenue side. Now we're going to come in and we're talking about the expenditure side. Where do those revenues go, and what type of services do we provide with those revenues? So as we look at the total budget, again, the total budget is $1.67 billion. That's our adopted budget for 16-17. And when we look at this particular pie chart, of note, when we're talking about the different categories, so these are the types of expenditures that we have within the city. So not the services that we provide yet. We'll get to that toward the end of the presentation. But these are the types. So these would be personal services, other services, and commodities. And one thing I do want to note is that we separate out the capital improvement program you see is kind of on the other side. And so the capital improvement program does include some personal services in there as well. But they're the capitalized ones going into the construction. Those are our engineers and our inspectors and so forth. So when we're looking at kind of that right-hand side of the pie, that would be our operational. So those are the ones actually providing services out to the residents. Okay. When we drill down and just look at that general governmental fund area, that's when you'll see really what we're talking about when we're talking about the services that we provide. Because we are a municipality, we provide services, we don't create or make things. And so to provide services, that takes people. And so those are going to be your positions, or what we call personal services. So you can see almost 73% of all the expenses that we have in the general governmental funds is due to position-related expenses. So those are positions here within the city. And we'll talk about each one of these areas as we go through, but we'll spend the bulk of it on the personal services because it is the greatest expense to the budget. Again, there's an overview of the three kind of operational areas that our departments deal with, and so you might hear them talk about them if they do a presentation, if you have conversations with them. So personal services relates to the position costs. So this would not include temporary employees. These would be city employees. The other services and commodities, and then our capital equipment. So those are purchases. And we'll walk through those real quick. When we look at our personal services costs, there are three main contributors to the costs of our positions. One is the actual salary that the employer receives. The other is the contribution that we have to our employee health benefits, and then the contribution to the state pension plans. And we'll walk through those again. So when we talk about salaries, because we are a service organization, the city strives to attract and retain skilled professionals in order to provide quality services to our residents. So our salaries are reviewed periodically to ensure that they are competitive in the labor market. We want to make sure that we're attracting the best of the best. And our current forecast, our expenditure forecast, also includes our standard employee progression within pay ranges. So we have pay ranges within the city, and those are included. Progression in those is included in the forecast as we look out over the multiple years. When we look at our health benefits, the city of Mesa is self-insured. What that means is that we set the premiums for our employees, which is also the city's portion of those, and we also pay all of the claims. So we don't go, we don't contract with a third party for our health insurance. It's done in-house. As we look at those, medical claims, just like the rest of the country, have gone up significantly in the last few years. The last 2 years, we've actually seen double-digit increases in our total costs for our health insurance, or for our health claims, I should say. And at this time in the forecast, we are forecasting an 8% increase to that expense, both in the next 2 years. So 8% each year for the next 2 years. That is about national average. So the national average is about 8 to 9% increase in medical costs. Okay, the big one we want to talk about today are the pension plans. And we have, the city of Mesa participates in 4 different pension plans. And they're kind of listed here just to give you an idea of the number of, and when we say FTE there, that's full-time equivalent. So those would be positions equivalent to a full-time position. So 2 20-hour-a-week positions would be 1 FTE, 1 full-time equivalent. We're going to talk about those. What we really want to talk about is the public safety plans. We're not, that's where we're receiving our expenditure pressure. That's what's, when we're looking at going over the forecast, where we're seeing our expenses go up is going to be in the public safety plans versus the civilian side, which is the Arizona State Retirement System. This just kind of gives you a kind of look at where we are for the 16-17 budget, compared against where we're currently estimating for our 17-18 budget, about where that would go between both the fire and police. They are separate plans. So there is a plan for the fire personnel and a plan for the police personnel.
Candace, maybe you can remind us why the increase? Is it because more people are retiring? Is it because of legislative changes? Is it
That is an excellent question, Mayor.
yeah, okay,
And in
I'm
2
sorry.
slides, you will have all of your answers.
Thank you.
So as, we just want to kind of show the way that the pensions are is we receive a rate from the public safety system pension, and that rate is applied to the salaries. And so on this slide here, you can see that the rate has increased. So that's the rate for every dollar paid to an employee in their salary. This would be the contribution to the pension plan. And so that's what those rates mean. And so you can see our rates for 16-17, and then the rates that we have received from the pension system for what our 17-18 rates would be. And then why did those change?
Just quickly, just remind the council, so what's happening is the city's portion of a public safety employee's pay, that's our increase. That percentage increase is what's impacting, what drives those dollars. So we start with the percentage, then we apply it against the salary,
Our budgeted salaries.
budgeted salary to get our forecasted number. So that's why we showed you the dollar amount, but the dollar amount has really been being driven by these percentages and the increases in the percentages.
Correct.
And are you going
that-
to tell us why the rate increased?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So next one, we have had some legislation. So the rates going through legislation has had some impact on that. But it's really how the legislation has been applied. We'll show you the differences in the rate itself. So back in 2011, there were some pension reforms that were enacted by the state. The hope was to save money within the pension plans and then hopefully decrease or at least not increase as much the rates to the municipalities. Unfortunately, in 2014, there was 2 different cases. There's it's called the Fields case and the Hall case. If you hear people kind of talk about those, I'm sure you've heard those terms before. The Fields case revolves around the retirees, so those who were already retired at the time that reforms took place. The Hall case has to do with the employees who were here and active. They were active employees at the time those reforms took place. That's the difference between those 2 cases in essence. It's 2 different employee pools, if you will. That's why they're different. So some of the reforms were ruled as being unconstitutional, meaning that the state was not allowed to do that. They didn't have the capacity to do that. So in essence, they were overturned. And so the savings that we had in 2011, even though we had a couple years where we had lower rates due to those, we actually need to go back and reimburse those employees for that particular time. And so that's going to change. Basically, we have to kind of catch up. With those couple of years that we thought we had savings, we'll have to catch up because we don't actually have the savings from those years. So that's going to be part of the big spike. If you go to the kind of the next slide, kind of does a breakdown, and that really we want to kind of show you is where this kind of $12 million number is coming from, because it's not all legislative actions. It's also some actuarial items that are happening with the plan itself. So the top one, the major one, is the benefit changes, and those are the differences between what the legislation tried to do in 2011 and what this newer legislation in 2016 is still good, but not as much of a savings as that original 2011. So that changes that kind of future liability that we have. And so when the actuarial studies take place, and that's how they arrive at the rates that we need to contribute, they need to take that into consideration. So the major impact is the difference between what we thought we would save with those 2011 changes and what we will actually still save, but it's a difference with the 2016 changes that were made. So there was a difference between those 2. That makes up the bulk of what's happening over this next year. I want to point out it is not the Hall case yet. That's very important to understand. This is really just the changes in some of their actuarial assumptions. We haven't received the impact of the Hall case yet. That will not impact us until the 18-19 fiscal year budget, because it just went through, and so that was not wrapped into the actuarial study. And so that won't affect us until the following year. So when we're looking at the $12 million, we're really just looking at the changes in the underlying assumptions of the pension. So if you look at some of the other lines, for example, the second line on there is what they had anticipated the pension would receive in interest was higher than what was actually received. So there's some catch up there. So funds that they thought would be in the pension were not there, so we have to kind of catch up. And then the third line actually shows you then, and then they've actually modified what they think they'll get in interest going out. And so that's a national trend that we're seeing, is pensions reviewing what they think they'll receive in interest going forward, investment, and bringing those down. When they bring those down, that's going to be less money in the fund. Less money in the fund means that we need to contribute more. So that's an actuarial assumption that changed, an underlying assumption on those. And then some general ones. And then the last one down on the bottom is just this new defined contribution benefit. These are for the new employees that would be affected with the new legislation that passed in 2016, where there's a new option where they can go into a defined contribution benefit. There is a contribution that's required on the side of the city. And so that's a new benefit that we would add in there. But in essence, that's kind of overall what's happening, where that kind of $12 million breaks down to, which pieces are affecting it, and which pieces are affecting it the most. So basically, it's a reset, if you will, of our contribution to the pension.
So, Mayor, Council, Candace, correct me if I'm wrong. What's happened is what we assumed in 2011 as far as the split between what employees would pay and what cities would pay has now shifted back to a higher portion of the city's contribution versus the employee. That's what happened as a result of the
Hall case.
Of the Hall case, so that's what will be coming.
That's what will be coming in 18-19.
And these other adjustments are just related more to the way the plan has been administered and the assumptions that have been used and the calculation of what is necessary to establish a actuarial that assumes a certain, how much of it is financed, how much is it currently funded, is that right?
That's correct. There was, even back when they did in the 2011 reforms, the actuarial studies were not taken into account the full increases that the retirees were getting as part of the plan. And so in 2011, they tried to put a little piece in there. It still wasn't a full actuary. It wasn't a fully loaded of what the impact would be to future increases. And when the 2016 includes a cost of living adjustment, and that does, and they have now put that in. So the underlying actuarial study has been updated. If to make it kind of a little more simple, it's been updated to include all of the assumptions that should be in there. Some of those were missing previously. And so it's really a resetting of what our contribution is into the pension plans.
And then Mayor and Council, just a couple other notes. This is not a one-time payment. This goes into the base budget. And so if some of you will recall, 3 years ago, we had a spike of $8 million that came to the city. We were able to work out with the pension, with the board to make those, make those adjustments over 2 years, 2 years?
We did over 2 years.
2 years, but it's still an amount more than $8 million. On this $12 million, we have tried very desperately to find ways to get the board to allow us to spread this out. To date, we have not had, they've not entertained that idea. They've listened to us, but they haven't given us any reason to believe that'll happen. So the effect is in less than 4 years, we will have to we will be coming up with over $20 million that we have to cover in new expenses, ongoing expenses, inside a general fund budget that's only $400 million. Am I saying this right?
That's correct.
So, and then that's
And that does not
just the
include the Hall
increase.
case.
That's just the increase. That's not the total amount of the pension payment, but that's just the increase in the last 4 years for public safety pension will be going up by $20 million. I might make sure I'm saying that right. Okay.
Right, because we have the 8, and plus we're going up the 12 here. And then the anticipated dollar amount for the Hall case in 1819 is $6 million. That's what we're currently, we don't have any estimates from the pension plan. That is us looking at what that's going to do, which is that change in capping the employee's contribution back down to where it was before, and kind of repaying them for those years that they contributed more than that dollar amount. So we've done some calculations, and at this point, we're estimating that the Hall case would impact us about $6 million a year, starting in 1819. So that would be on top of the 8 plus the 12 plus an additional 6.
Okay, so that, the amount of the increase is 20 million, but the total pay-in, is that what's reflected back on page 10, which is 40 million for this fiscal year and
There you go,
53
Mayor.
million for the
Yeah,
following
there-
year? And
yes.
then
Yes.
the Hall case kicks in after that, so there'll be an additional,
An additional
Continual.
6 million
We would
between the
clo-
two plans.
Yeah, we'll be
Yeah.
close to 60 million. Again, take your 50, 60 million dollars just in pension cost for public safety, for sworn officials, that's 60 million, 55 million out of a $400 million total general fund budget. It's just, it just becomes a huge dollar amount. That pension cost is greater than the amount we spend on entire departmental operations in the city. And you can imagine when our revenue from sales tax each year, in a good year, may be going up $2-3 million,
Right.
how to absorb 12 is very difficult, and that's why we currently have all the departments looking for reductions in their budget, because we can't absorb it with others. And we'll talk more about this on the 16th when we put the revenues and expenses together, but this is by far the greatest pressure on our budget today. So.
thank you. Yes, Mr. Whitaker.
So they assume that it's going to be, the actuarials assume a 7.5% return. I was wondering if you could comment personally on that return rate, and if the city's actually preparing for first, if you could just comment on the 7.5% return rate.
Well, it is, they have not, the return rate that they had in the actuarial studies before, they had not achieved that. So they haven't achieved it over the last few years, and that's why you see that kind of second line is that kind of catching up to that. They have, like I said, they've brought it down. It is, from what I'm seeing across the country, all of the pension plans are starting to kind of bring that down. Is it in the right area? I'm not sure that I can comment on that, on what their return on investment will be going forward. And obviously, the better it is, the better for us, because that'll help us on the rates. But other than that, I think they're getting closer. At least they're bringing it down to a more reasonable level,
Realistic.
more realistic than it was before.
So let's assume, is the city preparing for the fact that if we don't actually get the 7.5% return that they're anticipating, more of a realistic 6.6, maybe even less? How are we planning forward with that versus just accepting the actuarials that they give to us?
One of the things that we do is, obviously, as municipalities as a whole, and also the League of Cities works with the pension plans to try to make sure that we understand at least the information that's going into those. And one thing I should note is that when they do make these changes, and that's why you don't see, it's not such a huge area here, but they do smooth it over 7 years. And so when they're looking at making these modifications, if they're trying to do a catch-up, if you will, that catch-up isn't in 1 year, it is over 7 years. So that does hopefully give us some time to adjust and look at those. So it's not just necessarily a 1-year bump if they make those types of adjustments.
I'm still.
But at this point, we're just trying to cover the $12 million, look at the 6, and work with them on
So
if there's a
to answer your
phase-in or
question, no,
something options.
we're just going with this assumption right
Right,
now.
we don't have anything set aside
And there's
for
some
what
risk
is-
from that. You're right. I mean, your point is well taken. But these are studies, these are the reports. We have to, if you would, accept the reports from their actuarial consultants. We can question it, but at the end of the day, that's what determines the published rates. And frankly, because there's a lot of employee groups and everybody else is looking to make sure that Candace and I aren't giving you bad numbers, we kind of rely upon what those third parties provide to us. Now, what we've we've asked to be done, and I understand there's legislation that's going to address this, is trying to find, to work on allowing for the amortization of the payment to be extended to a 30-year period, which will give us some relief. That's not going to happen this year. That would be
Right, that'd be
in a
following year.
subsequent year. But and on the other hand, I should tell you that city managers of Mesa and Phoenix are working together to get their finance staffs together to see if we can do some independent reviews of the way these reports are done from PSPRS and see if we can come up with any other ideas and ways to help smooth this out. But we're not going to have time to get that done probably in the next, 4 or 5 months for the budget. But we are, Phoenix, Mesa, Tucson are probably in the state of Arizona actually, have the greatest impacts of any entities in the state. So we're all trying to work together to see if there's other solutions. The pension board isn't necessarily motivated to reducing these costs. They're just paying the bills. And so we're trying to find ways to help figure out a way to make this more appetizing for community budgets.
So I hear what you guys are saying, that we're allowed to amortize it if we don't meet the returns, if that unfunded liability keeps increasing. But what about year after year if we're not meeting that 7.5% return? We just keep amortizing 12 years every single
Well, the
time?
amortization rule is it's just part of the entire calculation, right? And so if you shorten that amortization, that means you have to meet your actuarial goals in a shorter period of time, which increases the spikes of the payments. Things like your mortgage, if you're buying a 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage. And we're suggesting that instead of having a shorter amortization schedule, it should be extended out a little bit more. And that would give us some relief. So that's one issue. The rate then becomes another issue that we'll have to keep monitoring. And as Kenneth says, it's looked at over how many years did you say it's looked at over? 7?
Right, when they do these types of smoothings, they smooth it over a 7-year return, which is
We'll have to
separate
watch that. I
from the
mean-
funded portion of
So
it.
there is vulnerability in this number. That's correct. We don't have,
We're not setting funds aside in anticipation of
we're not. And we
of
kind of
these
have to
changing.
accept what the actuarial gives us. So there is risk in here. There's no doubt. I mean, we agree. There is some risk that this number still isn't sufficient and there may be other adjustments in the future. But right now, it's based on an independent actuarial consultant. And so that's kind of what is sent out to all the communities. So we're kind of taking it as it is presented to us right now.
Thanks.
So it's a $20 million punch in the gut, and so we're not necessarily arguing, well, shouldn't it be a little bit more? Because we think you're likely to
Well,
continue to
the council
underperform.
Whitaker is correct. There's
Yeah.
vulnerability. It could be.
But there's a good chance it will, yeah,
But if we can work on amortization, maybe that offsets the rate.
yeah.
The point being, we can't amortize in perpetuity, right? I mean, we can't just keep pushing. In your analogy of a
Right.
15-year versus 30-year mortgage, we can't just keep saying, let's take out a 45-year mortgage, let's take out a 60-year mortgage.
Correct.
I mean, at some point, it's unsustainable, I have to imagine,
I
if we're
think
not
you-
meeting the numbers. every
Right,
single
if you
year.
maintain it at 30 years and just say that's how long it's going, we're willing to take the liability, essentially it's the unfunded liability, and how long are you going to take to pay it out? If we say we're looking at it always as like a 30-year mortgage, that's kind of what we're suggesting. Until we can get our feet under ourselves, and then maybe over time, out in the future, maybe as some of these reforms take place, maybe then there's an opportunity to begin to shorten that amortization, which would then obviously help to improve the reduction in the liability quicker. If I'm
Correct.
saying that right.
Correct,
So-
correct, because the reforms that were in place in 2016, we won't see the savings from those for quite some time, because those are employees that came in, hired after that time, so that won't be until they actually retire. So we do have that long term of it's going to help our unfunded liability because they're in a different kind of pool. And slowly, as we get more and more of those employees in our mix, then it'll kind of reduce our future unfunded liabilities for those particular people. But
Assuming
it'll take
that
a
they
while.
choose defined contribution over defined benefit, it is optional.
Well, right, but even in the, even for the ones coming in the 2016, they are under the new regulations for the pension versus the ones that the Hall case refers to, where they were here, already active employees in 2011, and we're kind of paying back between 2011 and 2016. Those guys are still in the pension as it was stated before. anyone hired after those 2016 reforms would be in the new kind of COLA versus the other increases, and they're on that 50-50 kind of share with going in. So we will see that eventually, but it's not going to happen in the beginning. In the beginning, it'll actually rise. Our costs will actually rise because we'll have people in both plans. And until we start kind of getting that shift in population to more of the newer employees, then we'll start seeing that going down. So I think where Chris is talking about is if we can move, right now it's a 20-year closed program, which means they'd like all of the, everything to be fully funded, the pensions to be fully funded within 20 years. 20 years closed, meaning 20 years becomes 19, 18, and so forth. And I think what we're trying to propose to them is that because we are basically resetting what our contributions into the pension, that we should go back to that 30-year closed, and then let us start to get to the point where we're starting to see maybe some of that benefit of these reforms that we won't see for a few years. And then as we get closer, maybe we could, that 30 years, does it end up taking the full 30 years? Maybe it does take 20, but for right now, the 30 would reduce our pressures right now when we're seeing the pressures of having two people in both plans.
And then with all these changes, how does that affect our percent funded in each of those buckets? Or is that another slide? If I'm jumping ahead.
No, I did. We took that slide out because we thought that was a little too much. But I brought it with me in case there was a question. So the funded status for 16-17, for the fire portion of it, we are currently sitting at 56% funded. When we go into 17-18, it's going to bring us to 52%, so 50 from 56 to 52. On the police side, we're currently at 51% funded, and when we move into 17-18 with the new study, it'll be at 48% funded. So again, the dollars that are in there don't change, but because of the actuarial study, that changes our unfunded liability, so that changes our percentage. But that's where that would be sitting. So in 17-18, we'd be sitting at 52% funded in our fire portion and 48% funded on the police portion.
And a healthy funded number is considered what percentage?
We are actually funded relatively well in comparison to all of the other communities. I'd say Ryan.
Ryan, what's the ASRS at, 70-something?
Yeah. Hi, Mayor and Council. I'm Ryan Wimmer. I'm a deputy director. The other one.
Who's the other one?
SRS is currently funded approximately 77, 78%. Nationally, the standard for a well-funded plan is 80%. That's typically a healthy plan.
Did you say ASRS?
Yes, the Arizona State Retirement
80%.
System, which is the
The
plan
civilian side
that all the city employees are in.
Okay.
Other than the.
But now, Mayor and Council, we have been doing rating calls with our bond rating companies. And while they expressed concern about the dollar amounts, they kind of said we were average as far as the actuarial for public safety. So I don't know if that makes me feel any better. It just says that there's other parts of the country in much worse condition than we are. But it didn't seem to draw a lot of attention yesterday on the call.
It did not. We've had two different rating calls, and while it was a discussion point, it wasn't a concern to either one of the rating agencies.
They were more concerned about the dollar amount, how we were going to absorb that and what our plans were.
Mr. Luna.
Just real quick, how did Proposition 124, did it provide relief to cities in terms of the future, in terms of the pension plan?
I'll take that if I may, Mayor, Vice Mayor. The reforms that were passed in 2016, there was a state enacted reform, and then there was also a ballot measure, if you'll remember, that we voted on that changed the Constitution. There was no Constitution; it was an amendment. The main provision that saves cities and towns money in the long run is the replacement of what was called a permanent benefit increase, which if you talk to most people, they'll say that's the provision of the PSPRS systems that caused this whole mess, because it was a very generous, they don't call it a COLA because it wasn't based on cost of living, it was just a formula for giving a yearly increase. So the constitutional amendment that voters approved in 2016 replaced the permanent benefit increase provision with a cost of living adjustment for all PSPRS participants, including retirees, all living retirees, existing employees, no matter when they started in PSPRS. So that constitutional amendment does in the long run help cities and towns with our costs. The reason the costs are going up so much this year versus, this year, right after those changes, is because that cost of living adjustment provision that was approved as part of the constitutional amendment is more generous. It saves less than the 2011 reforms would have saved on the permanent benefit increase. So in essence, much of the cost that would have hit from the Hall case next year has been preempted by the reforms that were approved in 2016 and is hitting this year. So we're getting it a little sooner than we would have got it, and we're getting it less than we would have got it if those reforms hadn't have happened in 2016.
But a lot of the reforms also will be beneficial 15, 20 years from now.
Right. It would have been worse. I mean, that's the right way to look at it. It would have been substantially worse without those reforms in the long run.
Can you comment on the Senate bill that was passed, SB 1428, I think is the other one you're referring to?
Yes. So, the reforms, basically all the reforms were in the Senate bill, and it was passed by the state. All the constitutional amendment did that voters approved was to change the language in the Constitution to say that benefits shall not be changed, and I can't remember the word.
Amended.
Except as provided in SB 1428. So that's basically, those were all the reforms in that bill. So I kind of see them as one. The constitutional amendment just allowed for those changes to happen.
To all existing
yes.
members of the pension plan. And that's what was getting overturned by in the 2011, the Fields case and the Hall case, they're basically overturning them because they're saying that the benefits could not be changed for existing members of the pension plan. So when we voted on that as a state, that was allowing that change to take place, basically to affect all members of the pension plan, regardless of when they entered the pension plan. And so that allows it as a package, and that's why Ryan's talking about, we kind of see it as a package. You need the one in order to apply the other one to everybody. Otherwise, it would be just like the 2011, it would only apply to people going forward.
Thank you.
So last year, we were talking about a $400 million unfunded liability. I think this year, we're talking about a $500 million unfunded liability. And I know we want to amortize this as much as possible so as to lessen the immediate impact on our budget. But when are we going to tip over to seeing the unfunded liability coming down instead of going up?
Mayor, the unfunded liability is now north of 500 million. It's 514 million. Next year, with the impact of the Hall case, I would expect it would increase again. Also, to Councilmember Winkle's point, the PSPRS board has already voted to. I'm sorry, Whitaker.
We've all done it.
So much
I'll have to put your pictures up in my office in practice.
Please
Councilmember Whitaker. The PSPRS board has already voted to reduce the actuarial assumed investment return for next year to 7.4%. So that will be, like this year, we went from 7.85 to 7.5. Next year, they've already decided they're going to go from 7.5 to 7.4, so there will be an additional cost there. So next year, it's going to get worse again. But after that, the whole idea of an actuarial study is to say, where does it need to be so that it doesn't change? So assuming they get everything right, it should stay the same for 19 years.
That's a big assumption.
It is. It is. And it's impossible to get all assumptions right? There's 30, 40 assumptions in these models, one of them being the investment return rate. But there's assumptions about, who retires, who laterals in and out, pay raises, hiring new positions. All those factors go into the assumptions. And if they don't all, they never match in reality. So there's always an adjustment.
Well, this has been a cheerful discussion, so good way to start the day. Thank you. Other questions on this? Yes, Mr. Winkle.
When we pay these bills or a city contribution, are we just sending a check to the state essentially because of a number they give us? Like, are we getting billed by the state?
It actually goes through Mayor and Councilmember Winkle. It actually goes through our payroll. So where they start is they start with the dollar amount that they feel that we need to contribute for the annual dollar amount. But then they kind of convert that into the rate, and that's how we get that rate. That rate then it gets applied on the salary. So every time we have payroll, every time we cut checks, it comes out as that percentage against whatever salary we did against for those sworn. So that would include all salary, whether it was salary, overtime, whatever it is that they were paid. And then that comes out as the liability, and then we send it into the pension. So they don't bill us, we apply the rate to our salary, and then we send a report that says, here's what we paid out in salary, here's the percentage, and here's your check.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, Candace, does that conclude your presentation?
I wish,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but I will
like
go
there
through
were-
I will go through it.
we're still in the middle of some slides.
Right, I do have a few
Okay.
slides, but that is the bulk of it because that's where we're seeing the pressures coming from, is the pension plans. And so we just kind of wanted to give you, when we kind of talked about the Hall case, just a comparison. I think we all know this, but it's kind of nice to look at it on a graph sometimes about, because we always want to do that historical pre-recession, post-recession that we like to do. And so we kind of have this graph just to show that how much things have gone up. Obviously, we all know that. For basically the civilian, the police sworn and the fire sworn over time. And that's where we kind of see that. As we go forward, it's just an example. So we gave you an example here of what that percentage is when we're actually paying out a salary. So a lot of times you'll hear us talk about a fully loaded cost. So when we talk about a position and their fully loaded costs, that means their salary, their pension, their medical, taxes, whatever it is, the fully employer portion of what we pay. And so I just wanted to give you an example of here how that's changing between 16-17 and 17-18. And then what we want to talk about also is that when we talk about a lot of times, why can't we go back? Our revenues are back to where they used to be back in 05, 06, 07, 08, those types of things. And why can't we just add all of those positions back? I think we all know why we can't do that now. The positions actually cost more today than they did back then. So we just did a comparison here of where we were. Back in 07, 08 was kind of our peak on our number of full-time equivalents. And we were at 4,138 FTEs. And the personal services budget was $345 million. We now sit at 3,805 FTEs, and our personal services budget is $416 million. This is total for the city, so this is everybody. These are our engineers and CIP. These are our enterprise funds, not just general fund, but just to give a comparison of where we sit today compared to where we sat before the recession.
So we have fewer positions, but they're costing us more than they did
Back in 07, 08,
back in 07, 08.
on dollar for dollar.
And is that because of pension contributions, or is that because salaries are higher? Or
Probably
both?
all the above.
All of the above.
But
It'd be
the
all
gr-
three categories, right? It'd be the salary, the pension, and the medical. But what we'd like to do is when we talk
I'm
about
sorry,
it.
Candace.
Candace, real quick question. Does overtime that public safety puts in for especially PD, does that affect the PSPR?
It does, Mayor, Councilmember Glover, it counts as salary. So whether it's overtime or whether it's the straight time, salary is considered the same, and we pay the same percentage on each dollar. So each dollar of salary has the same percentage that's put into the pension fund.
Was that your question?
That was,
that-
and how does it
what was
affect
it?
the liability as well? Because I'm just,
The pay increases?
yeah.
Yeah, so
For overtime.
overtime, specialty pay, well, sorry, base salary, overtime, specialty pay, vacation payout.
Right.
What am I
Any-
missing? Any kind of compensation.
Any compensation that goes to the employee adds into their total annual, and then the annual for that position, that would be part of the actuarial study, right, is the average annual per position, and that would then be the unfunded liability going into the future.
So by limiting overtime, we'd see a lot in savings, at least.
Yeah,
hopefully.
and yes, Mayor, Councilmember Glover, and that's one of the things we have to be very careful with, because often we see, you've heard this happen in other communities, where employees kind of getting near the end of their, and remember, their pension benefit is also determined by their pay. So not everyone gets the same pay. So if you have had a higher pay over a period of time, you get a higher pension. So we have to be very careful to monitor that there are not individuals who are seeking and going around and pursuing significant amounts of overtime because that's exactly what they're trying to do, is to elevate. Now, there's been some provisions to try to tamper that down, but we often see there are individuals going around trying to accumulate a tremendous amount of overtime. But yes, overtime obviously is a big impactor on pension. Yeah, absolutely.
And Mayor and Councilmember Glover, one of the things that we've been doing, and we've kind of talked to you each year, probably for the last 2 or 3 years on the police side, is to try not to have vacant positions within the police department. So we have kind of that base level of positions, and our goal is to always make sure we have enough recruits in the pipeline that those positions are always filled. And the more that we can keep those filled, then the less need we have for the overtime to call people in when there's due to vacancies. All right, so real quick as we go through, again, we talk about fully loaded costs. So when we're doing the budget, and that means also when we're doing the forecast, so when we look at 17-18, we're looking as though every one of those positions are filled. That we don't budget for vacancy savings, if you will. We assume every position would be filled when we set up a department's budget. That also allows them to pay for the things that we don't budget for. We don't actually put into the budget things like a vacation payout, or when people leave the city and they get their vacation paid out kind of in bulk. The departments cover that with the savings from the turnover of their normal positions. So it's kind of a budgeting tactic that we use. That's it on personal services. I think we've covered quite a bit on that. If there's any other questions, I'm obviously ready to answer them, or we can talk later offline as well if we want to do more detail. Commodities and other services, just so that you're familiar with the terms. Commodities, if you hear our departments talk about them, commodities are usually tangible things that you can touch and feel, things that we buy, equip, and so forth that are expendable. And then other services would be contractual. There'll also be temp services or temporary employees. So temporary employees would be in our other services category of our budget. Some of the things around that original pie, you saw there was some transfers out of the general fund. So we do a few transfers out of the general fund for management purposes. And one is into the capital fund. So that capital equipment will not show as an expense in our general fund. It'll show as a transfer out to our capital fund. And then that's where we actually purchase various capital equipment. They're not the construction projects. It would be the new vehicles would be purchased out of there. And then parks equipment and so forth, where they're just kind of replacing equipment. Those types of things are in the capital fund. We also do a transfer to our transit fund. We do receive transit revenues from the state. We also receive some revenue back from the fare boxes. So on both the bus and the light rail, we receive revenues back. And then, excuse me, and then the rest of it, though, is not enough to cover the full services that we provide. And so in 16-17, our scheduled transfer was $9.8 million, and then we are estimating that to go up to $10.8 million for next year. We do not, in the forecast, we have the extension, the light rail extension out to Gilbert Road. We have budgeted in 19-20 for a full year, as we're still working on when the opening date of that would be. But that's included in the forecast in 19-20 as a full operations and maintenance year.
Will that be a substantial bump?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that will be a substantial
What is it, 4 or
bump.
5? What is it?
You know, and I'm sorry, I apologize, I did
Yeah,
not
we'll
bring it.
get you that number.
But I'll bring you the net. It's really, we add in both sides, so it would be the additional expense side, and then we'll also have some additional revenues from the additional fares that we think that will come by have it going out to Gilbert Road. The fare recovery we get is based on when you board light rail. So we always like you to board in Mesa rather than another municipality, because we'll get a bit more of the revenue back from the fare box.
Good to know when you're planning your ASU football trip.
That's
Board at
correct. There are certain
Sycamore, not
stations
at Price.
Correct. We would
Okay.
like you to go to Sycamore Station, please.
Gotcha.
Or Mesa Drive. The other transfer that we have is to our Arts and Culture Fund, and this is relatively new. Not the funding of it, but the way that in which we use it. It used to be just an expense within the general fund. But in order to allow them to have better management over their shows and so forth that they do, we moved it into its own fund so they could manage their revenues that they receive directly. And then we just move our portion that we cover into their fund for them. So basically it's set, we set the base operations for them, and then they're able to, if they can generate additional revenues by additional shows and kind of be innovative, then they're able to take those revenues and invest back into programs within their facilities.
We just wanted to overcome any thought that we were somehow siphoning money out of the Arts Center revenues.
created a separate.
It's really like a management fund for management
So we could
purposes.
say, we'll contribute so much from the general fund, and everything else that you generate in revenues stays there to help manage and operate and invest in improvements or whatever at the Art Center. So that's how we've treated that. So it kind of looks a little bit almost like an enterprise, although there's a significant contribution from the general fund.
The 9.8 and 10.1, is that before or after an offset for revenues?
This would be after the offset for revenues.
Okay.
So this would be net of their revenues. This is the
Right.
contribution from the general fund into the Arts and Culture Fund. And it would begin, again, it's a base of operations that would go up slightly as their position costs go up that are in their base.
And then they collect, any revenues they collect above this, they keep also. Does that make sense?
It does.
And then there's just some small transfers that we do periodically from the general fund. The biggest one is the vehicle replacement fund. We do have a vehicle replacement fund that we do a transfer of $2.5 million each year to make sure that we have the capacity to replace that equipment when it is needed. And we look at it there. And I do want to talk about the debt service real quick, really just to say that we don't have a transfer from the general fund to the debt service fund of any substance. I'll talk about this one in a minute. But all of our general obligation debt service is covered by the secondary property tax. So there isn't a coverage from the general fund. The little bit that you're seeing right there are some bonds that we just recently sold, and that is for when we augmented the regional dispatch center with some additional pre-2008 fire bonds. Those are not part of the property tax, secondary property tax levy, and so we've just got some very nominal payments from the general fund to cover just that portion of that particular project. Just a reminder that we are still having the privilege of having the Department of Revenue to collect our sales tax for us, and the privilege of paying the bill for them to do that on our behalf. And so that has continued into next year.
Even though they're not
Even something we
doing
used to be able to do
that.
very well on our
Yeah,
own.
Yes, and we still, correct.
yeah. Okay.
So we just want to make sure, and obviously, we're still listening for that, because they are billing us for services that they're providing now. We are trying to make sure that we're aware if we start hearing something about them wanting to charge us more for other things, because they now have a mechanism to charge us, and so it wouldn't be new. And so we're always listening for that. We haven't heard anything for the 17-18 years, so we expect it to stay level with last year.
But just to be clear, they are now actually performing that function.
They are now performing that
As
function.
of
So
January?
officially in January, it was kind of a
Yeah.
soft start in July
Right.
where people could do it, but they weren't required to do it. And now in January, everything should be going to the Department of Revenue. And that's accounting for our additional kind of a 2-month lag now from the time that, for when we know what our sales tax figures are. So that accounts for that extra month. And this is the total charge here, and then we split that between the general fund, the local streets fund, and the quality of life, because there are 3 different funds that benefit from sales tax. And the general fund is about the $760,000 portion of this. Okay. Each year we talk about there are savings. We hope to achieve savings each year. We look forward to that. We don't always know where it's going to come from. Usually the savings that happen during the budget period are one-time in nature. For various reasons. There was a savings to something that it freed up some additional funds. How we look at that, there are many things that are still unfunded in our budget, and the departments have many more needs than we have resources that can cover those. And so the major things are what we call our life cycle programs. And so life cycle are those items that need to be repaired or replaced on kind of a cyclical basis. Maybe it's every 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. But they're large enough in nature that the department itself can't cover it within its normal operating budget. And we kind of budget for and plan for those centrally and kind of try to do a citywide plan to make sure that each year we're kind of replacing something. Those plans are either underfunded or unfunded, as the case may be, depending on what the plan is. And so we actually hope for savings each year, and we try to use realized savings. As we realize savings, then we go to our kind of number one item that's on our list of things that are unfunded. So some examples would be our police radios that we've been able to fund for the last 2 years. Those were never actually budgeted up front. They were realized savings that we had, whether it was through jail costs or our other items within the city, that we were able to realize those savings and set them aside and say, okay, that goes to the police radios, until we had enough money to buy the police radios. And so we do that with a lot of different things in the city, and we just kind of gave you some examples of those things that we do. When we get down to the numbers at the end of the day, these are the various categories, and just kind of gives you that view between where we think we are going to be ending for 16-17 compared to budget, and then also going into 17-18, what our expenditures are. So we are looking at a 5.5% increase is our forecast in expenditures for next year. So that does include the pensions and the personal services and so forth. And if you compare that back to where we thought our revenues would be, which was in the twos. And so as we compare those, our expenditures are increasing faster than our overall revenues are increasing as we go into 17-18. And then just at the end of the day, obviously, we've been talking about the public safety pension. So when we look at what type of services are being provided, we kind of looked at the what types of things are we buying. When we look at what types of services are being provided, when it comes to the general governmental, it is, the bulk of that is almost 62% is in the public safety arena. And so you can see where that kind of splits out versus the various other kind of departments. That's our 16-17 budget. And then our last slide just kind of shows you that comparison. It's the same categories that we use on our year-end report that we use for 15-16, where we have the law enforcement, that would be both police and court combined together. And then our fire and medical, parks and library, community services, everybody else. And then those transfers that we talked about, those three main transfers. So that's what we look at for the forecast going into next year, difference between this year and next year. And that's what we have for expenditures today.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, council? So, Mr. Brady, we're going to start talking about budget. This has been a nice primer to set the stage for the discussions about the budget. Can
Yeah, so,
give us a
Mayor, the 16th?
Right, correct, next Thursday.
Next Thursday, we've kind of walked you through different pieces, and now we're going to bring them together. We'll show the dynamics of revenues and expenditures, so you can now kind of see how the forecast comes together. So we'll do that on the 16th, so we can give you a picture of the dynamics of what fund balance, our reserves are, the trends in revenues, the trends in expenditures. You've seen the component pieces. Now we're going to kind of put them together in one spreadsheet. We figured it was easier to kind of deal with them separately. And then on the 16th, we'll bring to you kind of the dynamic of really it's the forecast of how the revenues and expenditures align themselves and the dynamics of the impact it has. And one of the things and council's seen this before, but we always we don't just look at what's happening next year. We look out 4 to 5 years in our forecast, and that's what we try to make the plan for. And so that's what we'll show you is today, without making any adjustments, what the forecast looks like over the next 4 to 5 years. So the council knows we've already talked about it internally. So we've already started working with the departments and asked each of them as they prepare their budgets to come up with 5% in some type of efficiencies or ways to save dollars, or even if there's ideas of revenues that can be generated that are not being collected today to help us achieve some goals that we need that you'll see, and we'll kind of better talk. We'll talk about those on the 16th about what we think our goals are over the next 4 to 5 years. You know, by looking at that, we may see that next year may look okay, but it's 3-4 years out, we'll see there's significant challenges for the city. So what we'll suggest is how do we kind of move in that direction? The good news for the city and the city departments, and they need to be commended for this, we've talked to the council in the past how we've had this structural imbalance where we've been spending more than we've been bringing in. We talked about trying to bring that down, and we've worked with the departments to kind of make those adjustments. Last year's budget, correct me if I'm wrong, Candace, budgeted, we said in the budget last year that we were expecting about a $7 million net loss between revenues and expenditures. We actually ended up the year at only $2 million in net loss. So we made a pretty significant improvement, the departments did, as well as some revenues that outperformed our expectation. So we're getting very close to hitting that, but now you just saw today we're being hit with some new dynamic. So again, it's kind of that same theory is, we're kind of, unfortunately, can't use the word, we've been reset. We thought we were to the point of breaking even. Now we've kind of been reset, and so we need to come up with another plan to try to close that gap. We're not going to try to suggest to council we need to close that gap in 1 year. That's just not real feasible, but you'll see in the forecast that we do need to do it within the next 3 to 4 years, and we would like to see us each year come up with a plan to begin reducing that gap. Now, it could come in revenues, but it, you know, we expect we need to do some in expenditures, and so we'll talk about that on the 16th.
So the way we've been financing this gap is by reducing our reserves.
Correct.
And we felt like we were buying down to the right level.
Yep.
I assume we're just going to prolong our,
But we were almost there. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
was so kind of kicking the pants,
are we
right?
dipping
We had
below
done a
where we
very good
wanted to be
job of
on our
closing
reserves?
that gap, and frankly, we would have told you, without some of these other pressures, that we would have accomplished that in this coming year. But again, it's kind of been reset, that gap, and so we've got to work again on kind of closing that. Now, it doesn't always mean expenditures. The challenge in, we talked about in the revenues, and here's the challenge that we have is our 2 highest months of revenues are December and March. We haven't received the receipts on those yet.
Correct.
Candace, in her forecast, you'll see, she's already plugged in the actual amounts that we've received for the months we know for this year, and then everything else after that is still based on a estimate. You know, and the other kind of unfortunate thing with the state collecting the revenues is now we're delayed 2 months in being able to get those numbers. So we won't get December next month, or
Next month, we'll be getting November. The next ones we'll be getting is November, and that'll show us at least Black Friday and the kind of the
but
beginning.
December we get in March?
Yes.
Or- Okay. So that'll be important to kind of see where that hits against our forecast. Unfortunately, our second Christmas in March, we won't be getting till May.
So after we've already had to finalize
Well,
the
about the
budget.
same time we're adopting the budget. So those are the kind of dynamics we're up against.
Have we considered doing our own actuarials? That way we don't get hit with these problems? Like the-
Actuarials on,
Like the PSPRS or anything else that we don't feel,
so that's what Mesa and the city of Phoenix are talking about. Yes, and we're asking some consultants to talk about that and see if that's possible. Yes, thank you.
so we'll start seeing some department presentations maybe in March or?
Those would be in April. So
April.
what would happen is we'd come back next Thursday and talk about really just overall bringing the forecast together like Chris was talking about. And then at the beginning of April, so March is when we're actually working with the departments to actually put the budget together. And then in April, we'll come back to you with a proposed budget. So we'll actually pull it together and say this is what we're proposing for 17-18. And then that would be followed by the individual departments to talk about what's happening or changing within their departments.
But I suspect even before then, there'll be some programs or discussions council want us to bring forward, and we can bring those at any time. Candace and I, right now, the departments are working on their budgets. We give them
We have until Monday.
till Monday to goals, and they have to put in the system, and they come and present their budgets, and then we present that to the council.
Very good. Council, any additional questions? Thank you, Candace, and we'll look forward to the certificate presentation, RC, or continuing education. Next item on our agenda for this meeting is information regarding job order contracting projects. Council, any questions regarding those items? Seeing none, hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Seeing none, we're moving on to scheduling and general information. Mr. Luna.
If you could put the graphic up, that would be great. It's the Heart Your Health event, again, this Saturday. It's from 8 to noon at the Red Mountain Multi-Generation Center. And it'll be a fun morning with free breakfast and lots of exercise. So I would encourage you all to attend that. Thank you for putting that graphic. It looks really good on television, by the way. The other thing is on Saturday, we're going to have a free movie at the park. It's sponsored by Bicycles and Pedestrians. So we are going to be showing Minions. And Mayor, if you want to put this hat.
See, I was afraid this is where that was going.
And Mr. Whitaker. This is for you. So Feel free to join us at the park, at Red Mountain Park. The movie starts at 6:30 p.m. Bring your bicycles, bring your blankets, bring your picnics, supplies, and have a great time watching the Minions at the park at the Red Mountain Park, 6:30 p.m. this Saturday, February 11th. So hopefully we'll have a great turnout to that event as well. That's all I have to report.
How could you not after that great plug and you and I wearing these silly hats?
I have a feeling that's going to be a campaign attack at it.
So, thank you, Council. Other scheduling items. Mr. Brady.
Just a reminder again, study session next Thursday, February 16th at 7:30 a.m. And we'll be giving more details, but just reserve your calendars. Friday, February 24th, Mayor announced this, the Cubs rally from noon to 4 p.m. at Sloan Park. And we'll have some more details about the event that's coming together around the presentation of the trophy. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, any other items? If not, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much, and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye, thank you. We are adjourned.